Good morning, everybody. Just to welcome our two new guests to the second part of our meeting. We have Heidi Alexandra, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, and we have Michael Liebreich, who is former board member of Transport for London from 2012 through to 2018. This second part of the meeting, we're going to be looking in a bit more detail at the tram and bus safety, and specifically the Croydon tram derailment. So members will remember that on the 9th of November 2016, there was a tram derailment in Sandilands in Croydon, which tragically 7 people lost their lives and 62 people were injured. Michael's been in touch with me as chair and most of you as committee members with some additional information following his time as a Transport for London board member, where he feels that there were some issues that TfL maybe didn't report on enough. And Michael raised a number of issues around accountability, transparency of sharing information, and the RAIB report as well. So we're just going to take this session to delve into some of that in a bit more detail, and I'll start with the questions, please. So to Michael, could you just expand on the issues you've raised with TfL in relation to the Croydon tram crash?
So first of all, let me say that in general, I think that TfL's response has been very good to what's an incredibly tragic situation, a tragic accident. It was one that consumed a lot of the business of the SSHR panel during 2017, quite correctly. So my role, as chair of that panel was probably to get across the detail, quite a lot of the detail, more than most, well, certainly more than most of than all the other board members. And as I say, I think most of the responses, the operational responses, were very appropriate. But there was this one issue which started to concern us during the middle of 2017, which was the fatigue audit, which was carried out, triggered by a separate incident, but really just the last of a string of incidents in which fatigue appeared to be implicated. And the way that that fatigue audit was handled, I think, didn't live up to the standards of the rest of TfL's response. And it caused quite a lot of concern for myself. It raised questions of, well, how was the audit conducted? In terms of, was it robust? Who was involved in that audit? How was what was the interaction with the operation, the part of first group that was being audited? Was that interaction robust? And then how was the resulting audit handled in terms of, there's a whole series of questions that opened up, starting around the middle of 2017. It really began and started with the very simple thing of saying, well, there is this fatigue audit, and an executive, and his name's going to come up, I'm sure, Leon Daniels, coming to the SSHR panel and saying that this audit raised no cause for concern. And the flag that raised in my mind was, well, if you have a whole string of fatigue-related or apparently fatigue-related issues, how come there's no cause for concern? And it's very unusual for an audit to raise no cause for concern. And so, I and the other panelists felt that we wanted to see the audit, and it took a long time for us to see it, quite an unusual length of time. And when we did see it, it did raise causes for concern. And we now know that there were that it was filed as requiring improvement.
What was the time span in terms of before you received that audit?
June, we were told that there was the audit taking place, and the field work was done in June. And at that point, we didn't know what it would say. But I wanted to see a copy of it because it was already raising flags. We then had another meeting in September where we were given an update, but the report had not yet appeared, but it was discussed because fatigue at that point had become quite clearly one of the sort of threads of the investigations. And so the discussion was, well, we need to see it, and it needs to be dealt with appropriately in terms of the investigations that were ongoing at that point, RAIB, ORR, British Transport Police, and the SNC Lavalin one. When it came to the November 2018 SSHR meeting, we had seen that report, and it was, I believe, pretty shocking. It requires improvement, which is the second worst of the categories that it could have had, although we now learn that that conclusion had been removed from the actual report. And the discussion was, led by myself, clearly we need to publish. And the response, and we'd actually had that, we'd started that discussion in September, the response from management was, no, you can't publish because there's these ongoing inquiries, which I think is entirely appropriate. But the response from myself and the other panel members was, but in that case it has to be sent to the inquiries. It was quite clear, not minuted, which I regret, but quite a clear discussion, which I'm sure all the other board members on that panel will remember, saying, well, it clearly has to be sent. So it was discussed in June. We talked about it again in September and said this is clearly going to be a key piece and it needs to be dealt with appropriately and sent to become part of the inquiries. And then November, it has to be sent. And then it was only in January, after we'd seen the RIB report, the draft which appeared in December, so the next SSHR meeting, I was very surprised to see that of all the evidence that was cited in that RIB report, this fatigue audit, which we must remember is probably the best body of information about the fatigue management processes at TOL, the bit of first group that was running the tram, is this detailed piece of work undertaken by professional auditors. It doesn't appear in the RAIB report. And it was only after I asked for confirmation that they had got it that it then became clear that it had not been sent. So then there's followed this kind of whole period of me saying we need to know the reasons and the mayor agreeing. And I think you've got the letter that I wrote to the mayor. I mean, it's very, that pretty much lays it out. What I said in the board meeting in May 2018, the mayor's response saying that he agreed that the questions were appropriate and they needed to have answers. The way that that got turned into a request for a chronology, which is not an explanation, the chronology that was then published in July, and then this kind of steady stream of FOIs and mayoral questions. Caroline's been asking questions, Keith's been asking questions, and it became absolutely clear that there was no desire and no commitment to deliver transparency on exactly why did this report not get sent in a timely way.
So
and in February, I kind of said, okay, look, I have to step in here. I've committed to the families. I mean, the widow of one of the victims came to an SSHR panel early in 2017, and I committed to doing everything in my power to make sure that the lessons were learned. And so in February of this year, I decided I can't drop it. Even though I'm now no longer on the board, I have to do what I can to make sure that the appropriate transparency is achieved. And of course, since then, we've seen that the audit was changed in discussions with TOL and all sorts of, so I'm getting more and more questions rather than fewer and fewer, and I find that quite disturbing. Yeah.
Just to clarify, though, that the fatigue report was then shared by TfL on the 12th of February 2018.
It was shared, yes.
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 Just to clarify that.